I'm very happy to welcome our next guest, Mr. David Grossman, and I want to thank you on behalf of the Institute. Thank you. On behalf of INSS and its heads and the great audience, because of the lights, I don't see all of them. Yeah, maybe I admit everything. Please, I don't need this method. Shut the lights. I thank you for coming here, especially to come to talk to you. I don't have to introduce Mr. Grossman because I think there's nobody in the hall that didn't read your books. There's a phrase in the Talmud that talks about the various names. It says, bigger than Rabbi was Rabbi. Rabbi, they meant Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi, then Rabbi was Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was even a greater rabbi. And bigger than Rabban is the highest rank is Shmai. So I don't think we need to give you any titles because everybody knows you. He is known by all as an author. And I want to start with the first question. Our institute, or this conference, is INSS, and we are dealing all these years, the researchers, in research and strengthening the national security of the State of Israel. And we deal with all sorts of issues. We heard the Chief of Staff today, and we'll hear the Minister of Defense, and Amos Yadlin, all sorts of military, economic, strategic subjects, but we all recognize the fact that one of the most important foundations is the soundness and strength of the Israeli society, the cohesiveness, the national strength, the norms, the ethics, the unity. In 2 years' time, we'll celebrate 80 years to the State of Israel. Our society has sustained a lot of pressures, wars, prices. You should know. The terror, just yesterday we saw the terrible results of terror, delegitimization, pressure. We always boasted that we can sustain the tension and build a state, and we did. In economy, education, technology, and also a democratic country. But my question is, at the end of the day, after all this time, do you feel in the non-formal dimension, the personal, the moral one, is there an erosion in our society, or we're still strong and sound? Good evening. I'm happy to be here, and I'm still under the impression of the findings that we just heard, and I'll say a word about it later. You asked an important question. Let's make an exercise. Let's say there were elections today, and a candidate would come along who would suggest as his ticket the current situation, namely the terrible security situation, the gaps between rich and poor, our place in OECD, the lack of security on a personal level, the status of Israel in the world. If somebody would bring this as his vision, would anybody even fathom to vote for this man? And the answer is yes. Namely, for many years now, people vote for somebody who organizes this reality for us. And the question is, why? Actually, it works that way. Why, actually, although we see such dramatic findings and the feeling of willingness to take risks, maybe in order to ensure a better future, it exists only among most of the people, but still not among the leaders. But let's go back to your question. I think there are two words that I would choose to speak about. The first word is home. Do we feel at home? The people, citizens of Israel, Jews and Arabs, do they feel at home in their own country? I want to remind you that Israel was designated to give a home in the deepest essential sense of the word, of individual and collective. For me, always one of the most blatant definitions to the situation of the Jewish people in the world and the Jewish person is that somebody who almost never, maybe a few times in history, but almost never feels at home in the world. There's always like certain points, even the most friendly places to Israel, there was always a feeling of temporariness. Israel, and the great thing in Israel and the elated thing of Zionism was to make sure that the Jewish people will have a home. Do we feel at home? I don't think so. I'm sure there's signs of homeliness, of all sorts of signs of collective ceremonies, rhythms of life in Israel. We created something here, a great thing of Israeli life, but this is still not a sense of home the way it should be, not a feeling of a person or a nation that lives in his own country out of self-confidence, belonging, from a knowledge that he has a future, that there'll be a sequence of generations. These things we haven't reached yet. We haven't reached them before. There's another nation who has a few demands. Some of them are justified, not all of them. Some of them are very not justified, some of them justified regarding some of our rooms. And in the most simplistic way, let me say, until the Palestinians have a home, we will not have a home either. We will have a fortress. Thank you very much. We'll have a fortress, but not a home. And we don't want just a fortress, although we need a strong place, a place that will defend us. The Middle East is a place that you cannot just leave to the goodwill of the Arab countries towards us. I don't trust this will, but I want us to be strong and that we'll know how to defend ourselves. But if you rely just on the military force, at the end of the day, we'll be defeated. Eventually, there'll be a stronger, more determined, maybe even more sophisticated than us, if it sounds strange to our vanity, but still. But this, God forbid, can bring our end. We have to be very strong, but we also have to act in order to lower the flames of the conflict. You see why I write such thick books, because your question was 4 lines and that's my answer. But the second word that has an impact on our society is victim, the victim. We are victims, the way we see ourselves throughout years, too many years, as victims. Now, in order to clarify, we were a victim quite a few times to the most awful, atrocious things that were done ever in history. But Israel was established so that at the end of the day we will stop being victims of others and of their threats and their hatred towards us, and see us today, this great superpower in the area, the army that I think is number 10 in its size and strength in the world. We benefit from almost unbelievable support of the United States and other superpowers. We still see ourselves and behave like a victim. Now, to be a victim is a mental state which is horrendous. It is reducing, it's paralyzing. If the victim, you have no responsibility for anything. You're a victim. That somebody did something to me. You don't take moral responsibility or practical. And again, I go back to the findings. There is a possibility here to make a change, to stand in a new way vis-à-vis our history and to consolidate the history and not just to be the victims of history. We do not do it. And that's unfortunately because this victimization of ours is so essential to the right wing, but especially to the Prime Minister, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, who actually manages in his own way, because he really is a magician really. in his capability to mix together the real dangers, the imminent dangers that Israel has to face together with these echoes of the past traumas. And he mixes them in such an efficient way that we, the Israelis, as a society that went through trauma, we are helpless vis-à-vis this manipulation. We cannot act against it. We are paralyzed. And we find ourselves, as opposed to our will, and all these amazing findings, we find ourselves passive completely within a regional and international situation that demands activity, action. David, our institute really promotes the younger generation. And the people from the younger generation, they said to me, and I didn't know that you're not just an author, you also wrote a poem 10 years ago, and you called it The Return of the Sticker, I think. And I think the young generation asked me to ask you, first of all, why did you write this song? And after we hear it, I'm asking, would you write the same song again today? It's a song, right? The song of the sticker. Which was written for a bumper sticker, but it says something about the people asking for peace. It's actually quite aggressive, probably cynical, but rather aggressive about all the things we should do with the Arabs. The song is made up from various stickers, bumper stickers, that were prevalent at that time. People wrote these stickers, and he just made them into a song. This was a very known song groups in Israel, and the idea came up 2 days after Rabin was assassinated, and the way to Jerusalem was blocked, and we had to go through a different way. And on one of the turnings of the road, there was a car of a right-winger. You couldn't mistake that, because all his windows were covered with stickers, very blatant, very right-wing. And the man stood there with a screwdriver, and he was scratching out, Rabin is a traitor, Rabin is an assassin. And I suddenly understood so vividly that at the end of the long line of all these inciters and all these people who speak violently, and there's a man with a gun and shoots. And then I started to collect stickers. For about 2 or 3 years, I collected many, many stickers, like bumper stickers, until all of a sudden I had the song ready. This is a capsule of all Israelis, and I collected most of the stickers in Jerusalem, so they were more blatant, more violent, more right-wing. And then I decided to give them to somebody to make take the lyrics and compose a tune. I didn't want it to be melodious or soft. I wanted it to be something that would be much more blatant and much more acute. And immediately I thought about rap music, which is really political. And I asked these people from that and until today the kids love it. Yes, I was hoping that you're going to dance in the alleys, but this is a distinguished conference. So while I was looking at it, I was thinking, today there aren't any stickers. There aren't any more stickers. You don't see cars going that declare and roar their belonging of the driver to whatever party. And it's interesting, maybe because of the fact that the politicians actually are the ones who shout out the stickers today, that the public discourse today is no longer a discourse of reasonings or arguments, but it's just exchanging curses and slanders and talkbacks of on politics. Well, I want to go to another subject that I know really bothers you, occupies you. We deal with that a lot in the Institute, and that is the concept which is called the status quo in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the world, everybody tells us status quo cannot linger forever. On the other hand, next year it's going to be 50 years of the status quo. I had a commander in the army who used to tell us all sorts of things. We used to say it's not reasonable. He says, but it's fact that it's a fact. The question is, how do you see that? And by the way, we saw the findings, and I commend Tzipi for that. We see that the Israeli public feels uncomfortable with the status quo. But the question is, what do we do? What's the alternative? What do we do if we don't come to some agreement with the Palestinians? This argument of a fact, there's a status quo, fact that it's a fact, I hear that quite a lot in discussions with right-wingers. There is no status quo in a place where there are people. There's no status quo in a place where there are people who are captive and humiliated and feel every minute of their life, every cell of their body, the tort and the oppression. There's no status quo. On the contrary, what happens is that what is created now is some sort of a gap between the citizen, I'm talking about Israelis, the citizen that feels that something is wrong, something is not right. In all the findings we saw, most of it had a sense of people, even people who belong maybe to the center right, that we should find another way. We should get out of this situation. It cannot go on. A sense that I think is natural. No human being at the end of the day, if it's a normal human being, doesn't want to conquer another people. Maybe he would want the other people not to be here, but since they are here, the situation of occupation is, as much as you hide it under the carpet, eventually it starts bubbling. Little by little there's an emptiness between the regular civilian citizen and what we call the situation. But this emptiness does not remain empty, because inside there are all sorts of currents of forces that have an agenda. They know what they want. They're extremists. They're determined. They are kidnapping us from our future. They're kidnapping our lives. It's a process we see all the time. There's no status quo within the Israeli society. It's becoming much more cruel, because if you see another world for 50 years, eventually you have to start believing that this other nation is less human than you. It's a fact they're in this situation. They brought it upon themselves. They're less human than you are. This thought is the root of the destruction of democracy. That's the source of destruction of democracy, that you start thinking that people are not equal, that you stop granting to such a collective like the Palestinians the right to existence and the validation of their existence. And you start already to have some sort of a bookkeeping of your morality, and you do not see to what extent the things that you do to others penetrate little by little into your inner systems of your society. And look, how do we relate to any other in our society? Look at what rudeness, suspicion, violence we treat anybody who is different. Look how we deal with the Holocaust survivors in Israel, or the poor, or the foreign workers. All these things, at the end of the day, this is copying the conflict from the border to our society. I want to ask you another question. You said in the beginning that actually, what have I got to say more than any other Israeli citizen? But afterwards, you agreed. You said, yes, I do have something to say. And I want to ask you a question as a writer. What does a writer have, or the literature have? And I know I was educated in the Jewish heritage. I know what it is, an author, creator, a scholar, a Talmid Chochem. But I want to ask you, in your opinion, what is the uniqueness, what does the author or the writer has as unique? First of all, writers do not understand more or know more than politicians, journalists, historians, taxi drivers, or grocery store keepers. We have, you know, whatever anybody else has. There's one thing that maybe the sensitivity to the language and the urge to describe everything very accuracy, not with manipulated words that the government or the situation or our anxieties tend to launder them, to make them, you know, these words for us. But the thing that literature can contribute is what makes a person a writer, because had I had to write a novel on this conversation now, I would write from your point of view, and the lady sitting here, and my point of view, from my point of view, when I tell it to my wife what happened this evening and what she thinks about it, to create as more points on the situation as possible. But I think that had I had to give one suggestion to the Israeli leader, see the conflict from the point of view of Palestinians. Don't defend yourself from their point of view. Usually, because we're at war, we jump. We don't give any legitimacy, even one iota of identification with the enemy. But maybe we should do the opposite. Maybe he remains our enemy because we never dare to look at the reality through his eyes. We saw it also in the slides now. Suddenly we have a feeling that the Palestinians all of a sudden, and a few months ago, some fly of madness bit them, and they are crazy and they start killing Israelis as if we did nothing. As if history started a month ago. We delete completely, by the way, in a very efficient way. Amazing. From a psychological point of view, it's amazing. We delete almost 50 years of occupation with all its meaning, and I don't have to elaborate. You know exactly what I mean. Therefore, the most important thing is to demilitarize ourselves from the fear, from the existence of the person in front of us, even if it's a bitter enemy, to try to understand how they read the text of the conflict, what they would have wanted to wish themselves and their children. Where are the main failures that they have? And they have quite a few failure points. That's what I think can contribute. And since we have another 2 minutes, I just want to say another thing. You said that you want to talk about Judaism and Israelism, and my feeling is, in these days, these years, that something bad is happening to our Israeliness, because Israeliness, that a priori there was something in it which was daring, initiative, open, strives for dialogue. In these last years, the more we have this dead-end feeling, the despair is prevalent in Israel. This reality goes into this tragic wound of Judaism, and I mean the feeling of persecution and victimization, this feeling of not being understood. We feel nobody understands us in the world. We keep detaching ourselves into some corner within this national character, if we can say such a thing. And this is a very dangerous place, because in that place we start being aggressive, suspicious, fundamentalistic. We start being much less open and democratic. This is a devastating place for us, because it's already formulated as an option in our existence as a collective. And it's so important to get out of that place, and that's why it's important peace. Peace is important not because it's going to solve the very important problems of territories and settlements and irrigation and refugees and right of return and whatever. peace is important because it will enable us for the first time for many years, generations, to be in a different way in the world. To be in this world not out of fear, not out of a sense that we don't have a future, but to be fully in this world, to understand this great thing of people of the members of the Jewish people who got their state. They live here and they know how to make their life here with a feeling that they have a future, out of an attitude of complete equality to those who are not Jews, because that's also a value of Judaism, to treat the foreigner in the same way. All these things we will achieve only if there's peace here. I want to thank you on behalf of all the audience. For me, it was a personal experience. Thank you very much.